I really do believe that the failures are what makes us a success, but it took me a lot longer to realize that than it should have. And I wish I had failed more younger.
This is the Construction Veteran Podcast. Construction Veterans Podcast. Connecting and celebrating veterans in construction. Now, here's your host, Scott Friend.
Welcome back to the Construction Veteran Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Friend. Today, my guest, Lisa Jaster, I feel like she doesn't even need an introduction. While she's known by many titles and many names, she's on a mission to delete the adjective. Let's dig into it. Hey, Lisa, how's it going?
All right. How are you doing today?
Good. It's really good to talk to you again. You've had a lot going on.
Always.
Yeah, that's an understatement. So, just to let folks know how we know each other. So we got linked up. I saw it at Facebook at the time, and I think I had reached out to you. I said, "Hey, is this the same Lisa Jaster that went through Ranger School?" Because at the time I was really interested in going, and we'll get into your story. But I was concerned about my age going through, and you really helped encourage me. And come to find out, we were in different arms of the industry, and then we ended up in the same brigade. So that was a little wild.
Yeah.
So, Lisa, this is a podcast focused on veterans throughout the industry. So why don't you take us through a quick history of your service background?
Well, service background specifically. So I went to West Point, graduated in class of 2000, commissioned as an engineer. Of course, soon thereafter, September 11th happened, and I had a degree in civil engineering specifically. So we went to Afghanistan right after September 11th. I was stationed at Fort Stewart at the time. I happened to be, for a short period of time, the only degreed engineer in Kandahar, Afghanistan. So I got to do a lot of very senior work for somebody who was very junior in the industry, much less in the military. Barely a couple years of adulthood, I should say, under my belt. After that, went to Iraq soon after Afghanistan, and was able to do actual life support area build outs. So doing construction, but also doing things like minefield clearing exercises. So our a full breadth of missions, from horizontal construction, vertical construction, to actual combat operations. After 7 years of active duty service, I fell in love with and married a Marine. We could not get co-located, so he got out of the Marine Corps, followed me for a little bit, and then ultimately he joined the reserve. I got out of the Army after a while, realizing even with that equation, we weren't going to spend a whole lot of time together. So I got off active duty and ultimately got completely out of the Army. So I had a 5-year break in service because it took me 3 years. After I finally decided I wanted to go back in as a reservist, it took me 3 years to get back in as a reservist. And so starting in 2012 to today, I've been a commissioned reserve engineer officer, and I have, on the service side, have done everything from some pretty cool non-standard missions as a individual mobilization augmentee to engineering battalion command, as you were just mentioning, Scott, and now I'm on joint staff. My complementary civilian career has been the Army paid for me to get a master's in civil engineering back in 2004. And so with a master's in civil engineering, but I don't have a PE, I did a lot of construction as well as project management, did global contract management for Shell Oil Company, worked for Shell, or Royal Dutch Shell, for 12 years. Then I left the big organization for similar reasons as I left the military, is the lots of moving, hard to get co-located job-wise with my spouse. moved into a smaller organization, which was a engineering firm on the front end engineering and design side, and took over managing the all six of their civil engineering departments. And and after a while of doing that, I realized where my passion was in the military is with leading soldiers. So now my passion has also reflected in my civilian career, where I'm a partner in a talent management firm doing leadership development and executive coaching. And I do like to focus on my engineering and construction brethren, because we oftentimes get lots of training in the hands-on side, but we don't necessarily get adequate training in that leadership and management portion of the jobs as you go higher up in the ranks.
Yeah, I would agree. I was just talking to another guest. It's those, it's the soft skills. I think that's what the service really taught, especially people coming from maybe an MOS. It's not related to engineering or construction. They carry those soft skills in the leadership, the grit. So I got a couple questions on what you said. So you were your first deployment. You're in Afghanistan. Are you a lieutenant at this time doing these roles, since you were the only engineer there?
I was,
Wow,
and
that's wild.
I was fairly junior. I think I pinned first lieutenant maybe right before I deployed.
Wow, that's wild. So you're doing this real world big stuff, and that you're just I shouldn't say just, I mean, but still, that's a pretty junior role to be doing that stuff. So you were
Oh,
the
most definitely.
only engineer. I'm assuming you mean like a PE. You had your PE.
I don't have my PE. I was the
Okay.
only degreed engineer. So not
Okay.
only were there
Wow.
not PEs, but this was so early after September 11th that the CVs had come in and done the rapid runway repair. And then after they left, we were the next in. And so I went in with 10th Mountain, stayed for the whole deployment of 101st Rakkasans, Task Force Rakkasan, and then we transitioned with 82nd Airborne. And it wasn't until we were probably 3 to 5 months into our deployment where prime power and some of those theater assets started coming in with engineers. The rest of the engineer officers were engineers by the military definition, meaning they took a class and could look at charts, but none of them had done statics and dynamics in college or actually calculated force loads and moment diagrams.
That's wild. And I just want to clarify, you did say the CBs paved the way. Just going to throw that out there. So they were the first in. That's awesome. I didn't know that, though. That's really cool. And so you said you had a big break in service. When was it that you tried to get back in? What year was that you were having some difficulty? You said it took about 3 years.
Yeah, so my husband got back in the reserve while I was still active duty. And after I came out, it was probably a year and a half, maybe 2 years after I came off active duty orders, where, to be completely honest, I was getting jealous. Like he'd come back and talk about, and anyone who's been in the military, we call it a fraternity just because it's predominantly male. And I take no offense to that as a woman, but it's one of the best fraternities in the world, right?
Yeah.
You're close with complete strangers instantaneously just by shared service. And I got jealous of that because that doesn't exist in industry in the same way. And and so at about the 2 year mark, I started itching and I'm like, hey, I want to get back in. And very serendipitously, somebody contacted me, Valerie Coffey. She's a West Point grad, I think class of 86. She contacted me via Facebook and was like, hey, our IMA unit, our individual mobilization augmentee unit, needs somebody with your skill sets. We would love for you to come back. And it took about 3 years. And I had to go back through MEPS and duck walk with a bunch of 18-year-olds and do all that ridiculousness to get back into the army. But yeah, it took me 5 years total.
Wow. 5 years total just to get back in, or five.
Mhm.
Oh my
Yeah, so
goodness. Yeah.
I guess I should say it took 3 years once I had made the hard decision. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's a 5 year break in service for me.
Yeah. It's wild. And what year was that, that all started? that 3 year?
Uh, yeah, so it was 2009. I had had my son already, and I thought, well, I really miss this. I miss, for lack of a better term, I miss the guys that just, hey, what are you doing on Friday night? Nothing. All right, well, let's go play some basketball. I don't know you all that well, but I want to hang out because nobody's alone on a Friday night. So come on over.
Yeah, you missed
I
your
really miss
tribe.
that.
Sure.
I miss my tribe.
Yeah. Well, it's the reason I'm asking. So when I separated, this was 2011, and so that span sounds like it was the same time span. There was this big uh, drawdown, and we had that big
Hmm.
push in Afghanistan, and then I tried to get back in as well, and I had so many closed doors. I called every
Yeah.
branch. I was an NCO when I got out, and there was this. Well, you're going to start off as an E1 again. I'm going, nah, I'm not going to have an 18-year-old kid screaming in my face when I've been in combat. So I don't think we're going to do that.
Right.
But no, that's wild. I didn't know you had such a long break. So, all right. So let's back up. You got out off active duty. How did you get into engineering? I mean, obviously you had the schooling for that. How did you transition into working for these companies like Shell and what you did before you joined your current company?
So I used a placement agency because I had no idea. I knew I wanted to be an engineer, but I also knew I didn't have a PE and I never wanted to be a cubicle engineer. So I wanted to be out on project sites. And that's when the process of interviewing, I realized that construction management and working in the field was a much better fit for me. And not calculating X or calculating the loads, but similar to what I had to do in Afghanistan. Okay, we don't have type 2 Portland or type 3 Portland. We only have type 1 Portland. So how do I make concrete, but make it in such a way that it ties into the existing runway in an area that's extremely dry and 114 degrees on the runway? Okay, that's what I wanted to do, which is really construction management. And so when I interviewed for jobs, I interviewed for a plethora based on what Cameron Brooks thought was appropriate for me. But what I ended up finding out was that I got two different job offers from Shell and then one from ExxonMobil, and they were all in that unconventional space. So my calculating X wasn't super spot on, but my ability to manage unconventional situations was very much honed from my construction experience downrange.
Very cool. So, Cameron Brooks, and correct me if I'm wrong. So that's an organization that hires like junior officers, right? And helps them transition.
Right. Cameron Brooks helps junior officers. There's a couple others, like Orion is another one, and I think they help all transitioning veterans. There's a lot of different organizations. I actually work for one now where we work a lot with your very, very senior transitioning veterans, battalion commanders and above, sergeant majors and above.
Very cool. Yeah. So, okay. So we know how you got into the service. So what made you choose the construction management side? I mean, it sounded like there was that passion. You wanted to be in the field. You wanted to see it built. What drove you away from the office side? Do you think it was just your history in the field? You wanted to be out there getting it done, or what led you to that?
So I did end up being in the office a lot more than I wanted to, but it was more of construction management than actual engineering or project management rather than actual engineering. And yeah, it was the idea that I wanted, I didn't want my only assets to be the equations or the product, because on the front end engineering and design side, you can do a lot on paper, but when the paper gets handed off to construction, there's so many things that can go wrong, and that's what's fun to me. I like when things are going a little bit wrong and I've got to redirect, and I find it much more engaging than the mathematical side, I guess.
Yeah, it makes sense. See, that's why we get along. So I totally agree. That's the exciting part of the industry is when we get to solve problems, come together as a team, and overcome that, and relating it back to the service. It's you've got that objective, and we figure out a way. We got our primary, secondary, tertiary plans, and we execute. So that's awesome. So in what you did in engineering and what you're doing now, how do you think the service specifically helped you, specifically like when you got out and you're out in the world, your prior service, you're not in the reserves yet. How do you think that your military service helped you?
One of my favorite and least favorite parts about the Army is you get put in a completely unknowable situation and are told to excel with no more guidance than that. Like, hey, we don't know what's going on. We don't know what you're doing. We don't know what success looks like. Go forth and conquer. And that experience is absolutely fantastic when you transition it to the civilian world, where you go from college where there's a proper answer and you double underline it and you get it right or wrong, to your first job when you're under a mentor, when you're being taught, and then you move forward, and it's probably 5 to 10 years in industry before you really get slammed with variables that have no solution. And the military really gives you a skill set early enough where you're still pliable. So I think had I gone into corporate America right out of college and started down a traditional engineering path, it would have been a very direct ascension. Do this, then do this, then do this, then do that, then you get promoted, and then you do this. In the Army, that there's still a very obvious path most of the time, but your left and right limits are extremely broad. There's no way of knowing what's going to be thrown at you next, and you have to adjust. And that skill set being taught at 22, 23 years old when you're fresh boots on the ground adjusts your personality, and it creates a different type of leader and a different type of manager. And most people understand managers and leaders are not one and the same, but it definitely teaches you a skill set that makes you broader. And the other thing is, it's the situations you're thrown in early in the military are not just crazy variables, but some of those outlying factors are the culture. I went from a small town when I joined the military. I went from a small town that, was really white and Catholic. I mean, we had some Lutherans in town. We had 2 churches in town. One was Catholic, one was Lutheran, and we stayed on our own sides of town. And then to my very first barracks room, and I had a Jewish roommate and an African American roommate from Southern California who had a completely different set of values and experiences than I did. So not only in the military are you being thrown into these situations that there's no right answer and there's no direct solution, but the people you work with are all of a sudden not like-minded either. So you're building this team to solve a problem, and nothing fits into your expectations. I think that's one of my favorite parts about the military, but it's also one of the hardest parts about the military, and it definitely made me who I am today.
Yeah, that's wild. I had a similar situation when I went to boot camp. I grew up in northern Kentucky, and so not very diverse, and so boot camp was a huge shock to me, which was great. I mean, you get exposed to all these different mindsets and different ways people solve problems, and they're bringing their background to the situation. So I think that's great. There's no more groupthink, right? So I think that's awesome. Right. So back in West Point, let's talk about why did you choose, or did someone choose for you, the engineering path? What drew you to that? Because we've got all these different branches within the Army. What drew you to the engineering side?
So it's kind of a chicken and the egg versus an egg and the chicken scenario. I had originally decided I was going to be a physics major because I loved physics. And my team leader, when I was a plebe or a freshman, a cadet private, was like, I'm a physics major and I have to stay in the Army forever because what do you do with a physics degree? I was like, oh, good point. Okay, well, what degree has the most physics in it? And So I was like, well, I'm going to be some type of engineer. And I loved the environmental engineering because I was thinking be a do-gooder, and started taking some of those classes and thought, oh God, I do not want to build wastewater treatment plants for the rest of my life. And uh, environmental engineering is kind of a redheaded stepchild of civil engineering. So when I took my statics and dynamics class, well, I like statics a lot more than I like dynamics, and that led me to be a civil engineer by degree. Well, I didn't have to pick my branch of the military till quite some time after I picked my degree at West Point. And once I got to closer to graduation, I thought, well, engineering as a branch is the only place where I could really use my degree and then be employable afterwards. And I knew I was never going to get out of the military, but just in case I wanted to be able to get a job and to interview for a job where people understood what I did on active duty. So honestly, engineering seemed like the logical choice for me because I loved engineering as a field of study and wanted to work as an engineer in the long term, knowing that even if you stay in the Army 20 years, nobody retires, goes home, and never works again at 44 or 42 years old. So I knew I'd have to have a career after my Army career, and engineering just seemed like the smoothest transition.
Yeah, very cool. So tell me about, you said physics. What drew you to physics? So we talked about the civil engineering side, but what about physics is it that just excited you?
First of all, there's a right answer. I do like there being a right answer, which is funny because I didn't learn till later that I liked the fact that there isn't a right answer. But I just liked understanding the why. In classes like geometry, I liked postulates. I liked the explanation of, why things stand up, why things fall down. And so I thought physics was very interesting in that way, but unfortunately, physics really is an interesting study. It's not necessarily fun to apply. So unless you want to be in a dark hole somewhere and really have your nose into a book, there's not a lot of practical application to physics.
And I'm sure there's someone out there that does want to do that. So good for them. I think I know the answer to this, and we're going to get into your most recent journey and why you're pretty well known. But up to your journey till now, what you're doing now, is there anything that maybe, I don't want to say change because, who knows where you'd be at now, but is there, you look back at younger Lisa and say, hey, try this again or do this again, or I want to encourage you, what would you say to her?
I would say don't be afraid to make mistakes. I don't know that I ever was afraid to make mistakes, but I will say I was probably more cautious than I needed to be. I wanted to be top of the class, top performer in physical, military, academics. I was nowhere near, especially in college, high on the scale in academics. I was physically and militarily, but I didn't take as many risks, which ultimately resulted in me having to take more risks older to reach outside of my comfort zone. I wasn't, I don't know if that makes sense, but I really do believe that the failures are what makes us a success, but it took me a lot longer to realize that than it should have. And I wish I had failed more younger.
That's a good nugget right there. I like that. That's a good point. I can speak to the transitioning vets too. Take the chances now, right? Earlier in your career, especially the folks that maybe their JOs getting out or their junior enlisted getting out. Make the mistakes now. Find out what you want to do. It sounds like you changed majors. I changed majors 5 times before I settled. So but I did it, early 20s. So I made those mistakes until I settled into what I want to do. So I totally agree. So if we've got vets right now that are transitioning out, so say you've got some of your folks that are in your command or some folks active duty, anything, people that are just, they think they're done with the service, whether they're retiring or not. This is just the end of their career. what would you say to them about the construction and engineering industry to try to encourage them? Because there's a big gap that we have of younger people coming in. So what would you say to them to try to encourage them to join this industry?
A great aspect of construction and engineering is that it is so broad. You can get involved in a multitude of areas and still switch. It's one of the reasons I loved working for Shell. It's one of the reasons I loved being in the Army is you can work for 3 years as working construction. And then during that process, you can find out, you know what, I'm really, really good at the logistics side of construction, making sure the right stuff is in the right place at the right time. Okay, well, I can transition, keeping my same job as in like pay and with the same organization, but completely change my career path. And for those of us who left the Army young, we don't really know, especially with younger generations, because there's a different mindset on work and long-term work. The younger generations don't stay with the same company for 25, 30 years and earn the gold watch. They're looking for something else. They're looking for happiness. And if you don't know exactly what you want to do when you grow up, you can join the construction industry and you can work in one of the multitude of facets and still stay within the industry, still grow and develop, still get promoted, but really change what you're doing and never get bored. Again, even as I was doing construction management, there's project management, there's project engineering, there's project controls, there's project services, and that's just in the project management space. We're not even talking individual skill sets. Hey, I'm a carpenter today. Well, maybe I'm a welder tomorrow, and maybe I combine those two skills and start building equipment for a third-party company moving forward. There's such a vast array of things you can do without losing the work you've already done professionally.
Yeah. And, sometimes I had a younger guy who was getting really down. I mean, projects can be hard. Let's not sugarcoat it. They can be very difficult. It could be a funding issue, a manpower issue, a myriad of things, right? The design's not right. We got a schedule to meet, but it's important, I think, to step back and look at the project as a whole. And I had this guy that was really down on himself, and we're standing on top of this museum that I was with a subcontractor at the time, and we're helping build this museum in Houston. And I said, man, look at what we're doing. This is amazing. I mean, there was hundreds of people on that site and, probably thousands of people that touched the product that was going to be on that site. You got it, the AEC teams, but you've also got the manufacturing teams, the owner's side, the bank. And I just think it's really neat to take that 30,000 foot view at what we're doing, relating it to the service. You have this one job, but take a look at the conventional service as a whole. Take a look at the soft community, all these different aspects working towards that same goal. And so I think, just like you said, it's such a good transition too. I mean, we're doing the same thing somewhat. The mission might be different, but you're doing the same thing, working alongside of a team, figuring out problems, how to get to that goal. So we talked about people transitioning out, how you would encourage them. I think you're a great encouragement to a lot of folks nowadays. I want to talk about your story a little bit. So lots of people know you for a couple particular things. I think you know what I'm driving towards. So I want you to share, what your message is, because it's one that I really support. I've told you that since we first started speaking. So take us through how most people know Lisa Jaster, your journey along that, and what you're doing now, and some recent things that you came out with.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So in 2015, I had the opportunity to not only attend, but ultimately be one of 3 women who graduated from the first ever integrated Ranger School. And I was the first reservist. I love saying I'm also the first mom, but even more important, I'm the first father-daughter Ranger School graduates, which was a really big deal to me at the time, because my dad ended up passing away very soon after I graduated. So it was pretty cool that he got to stick around. He had cancer, and to see that. What that did for me professionally is I started a campaign very soon after graduation. It actually started in January 2016, which I got invited to the President Obama's final State of the Union address. And while I was there, through multiple conversations, I kind of came up with this catchphrase, which was delete the adjective. And it was the fact that, you knew me, Scott, as a battalion commander, and I don't know how well you knew me as a Brigade XO, but I didn't want to be a good female battalion commander. Like, that just, even saying it makes my skin crawl. Does that mean I'm not competitive with the male battalion commanders, or there's a different set of standards for me because I fit a certain demographic? And it's always been, especially since graduating from Ranger School, this weird asterisk that I want to delete from my career. Working construction management, working project management, working in the oil and gas industry, everybody noticed I was a female because I was, 3 inches shorter than everyone else, 50 pounds lighter than 90% of the people out there. I was the only ponytail and usually the only shaved face. So I stuck out like a sore thumb, but I never felt disrespected or out of place. And I also haven't felt that way in the military. I haven't felt disrespected or out of place, but I still get this little asterisk of female Ranger School graduate or female battalion commander, or, oh, I'm strong for being middle-aged, or these adjectives have always followed me. So in 2016, I decided I kind of wanted to make a point of saying that it's not my adjectives that define me. And at that State of the Union address, I had the opportunity of talking to all of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So all of them, from
Wow, that's a big
General
deal.
Mellor, yes, the chairman of, or the chief of the Marine Corps, the chief of the Army Reserve, Air Force, Navy, and it was fantastic. I was in this room with all these stars, and I asked General Milley, who was the chief of staff of the Army at the time. I said, "Sir, the Army has given me so much. What can I give back?" And he said, "Come back on active duty. You're about to pin Lieutenant Colonel. Be an infantry battalion commander," or something along those lines. It's not a direct quote. And I responded, I'm like, "Oh, I love my job at Shell. My husband and I got off active duty because we couldn't get stationed together, and I love my husband and I want to see him. Like, that's just not going to work for me, sir." And of course his aide was just shocked. He's like, nobody says no to General Milley, right? I mean, the guy's pretty impressive, and you can hate him, but you stand next to him for 5 minutes and you understand why he's got a very senior role, the most senior role in the United States military right now.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, nobody says no to this man. And I said, "Okay, sir, next." "No, what's the number 2 thing you want me to do?" And he said, "Be visible." And it was the most insane thing for him to say to me, because up to this point, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to be the quiet professional. That's what everybody wants me to be, the quiet professional. Just do your job. And that's the best way to delete the adjective, is just be another Ranger School graduate. Don't be a female Ranger School graduate. And after a little bit more explanation and some discussions, and then a lot of soul searching, it kind of got down to the point that some people cannot be what they cannot see. So it's cool to be just a Ranger School graduate, but there's people out there who, like you, don't understand that there are older people who go through Ranger School and succeed, which honestly, for a lot of my classmates, my age was more of an issue for them than my gender, because they're like, "How the hell are you doing this at 37 years old?"
That's wild.
And I mean, they were 22 and they could barely get up in the morning, and there I am, 15 years their senior, and I'm like, "All right, boys, let's go."
Yeah.
So, so this delete the adjective and then trying to be seen as an outlier are very much juxtaposed. So over the years, the last geez, it's been 8 years now. Over the last 8 years, I've written articles for the Washington Post, for the New York Times, for Task and Purpose, for various other periodicals, everything from Texas CEO magazine to Coffee or Die by Black Rifle Coffee, their magazine. And I've got all these articles out there, and finally this last year, actually a month and a half ago on January 31st, I published my book about Ranger School. And it's not meant to be any sort of leadership development book or anything preachy. It's just to show people that, yes, I am a female Ranger School graduate, but if you show this to your buddy, this book to your buddy who went to Ranger School, he's going to say, yep, I remember Sassafras Mountain. Yep, I remember that swamp. Yep, that sucked for me just like it sucked for her. And they're going to see that female Ranger School graduates' experience was no different than male Ranger School graduates' experience. So it was my way of kind of getting over that conflict of being what people cannot see and deleting the adjective. Was publishing the book Delete the Adjective this last January.
That's awesome. And I told you I have my copy. I hadn't dug into it yet. I'm in the middle of another book, but I'm really excited to read it. It's been really cool to follow your journey too. And your humility, I love it. I think, you're one of the voices that stands out right now in our culture, really pushing that in a good way. I have 3 young girls, and it's really cool to see my industry changing so much. To be more accepting of everyone because of their quality of who they are. I mean, what kind of leader they are. It's really more than your adjective, and that's spoken volumes to me. And I have this personal dream that I've shared with a lot of people that I would love for my girls to get into this industry. And I'm encouraged to see not just this industry, but things taking a turn for the better. And it's because of women like you leading that charge to be more, I don't want to say judged, but they're going to look at who they are as a person. Can they get the job done or not? It's not, what's their name, what's their gender, all this stuff. So I think that's really cool, Lisa. And I'm just super encouraged by what you're doing. And so for people that might be listening that don't know what Ranger School is, how would you describe it?
It's a whole heck of a lot of fun. No,
no sarcasm in there.
No sarcasm. So Ranger School is the Army's way of, it is not educating, it is testing an individual's ability to lead soldiers in combat, specifically with regards to small unit tactics. So that means 40 people or less. And so there's a crawl, walk, run phase. There's a testing phase. Everybody's got their version of Hell Week. At Ranger School, it's called Rap Week. But basically, it's a 9-week school that at the end, if you graduate and earn the tab, it means you have the stamp of approval of the U.S. Army that you can do well and make good decisions under stress. And to sum it up as succinctly as possible, you have minimal food. So you get 2 meals a day, and each of the meals are between 1,200 and 1,400 calories, but they're given to you within about usually a 3 to 4 hour period, and then the rest of the 24 hours of the day, you're not eating. Over that 9-week period, you're not sleeping. Your average work day over 9 weeks is 19 and a half hours. That's the average work day.
Wow.
You carry an average pack of 85 pounds. Sometimes it's lighter, sometimes it's heavier, and walk on average 200 miles under that 9-week period of time. So what the Army's trying to do is stress out each individual as much as possible, because they can't shoot live rounds at their own people. That's just not smart. So instead, you have reduced sleep, reduced food, and your body is under so much stress that all of the Ranger School students, your digestive system starts eating away at your own muscle. Like the smell of Ranger School students is so repulsive because the sweat that comes when you're self-digesting, is really bad. And everybody comes out emaciated, tired, metabolism's a little bit messed up. But during that period of time, each Ranger School student has to perform graded tests which are simulated combat environments. So you have to perform a raid, you have to do a reconnaissance mission, you have to do an ambush, you have to react to contact, you have to move through the woods quietly, and you have to keep all of the soldiers assigned to you at that time doing the right thing. So that's Ranger School in a nutshell. I could go into all the drama of it, but truthfully, it's one of those things that's horrible, and it's fun because it's horrible.
I love it. That's awesome. So I thought boot camp stench was bad. I can't imagine what Ranger School stench is like, all that sweatiness.
That's terrible.
Hey, I want to touch on a recent LinkedIn post you did too. You had the opportunity to meet Dakota Meyer. And so for folks who don't know, he's one of the Medal of Honor recipients. And he gave you a good piece of advice. So I wanted to see if you could share that.
Yes. So my path with Dakota has been very interesting. So he wrote a fantastic book. I've made my son read it. I don't think my 11-year-old daughter is ready for it. But he earned the Medal of Honor in Afghanistan. I think it's called something in fire. I apologize, Dakota, for not knowing. But when I graduated from Ranger School, he had actually come to speak to my husband's battalion. My husband was in battalion command of a Marine Recon battalion here in San Antonio. And Dakota was talking to my husband and my husband's team, and one of my husband's full-time Marines, he's a warrant officer, and his name's Gunner Skinta, kind of told Dakota about me and what I was going through at Ranger School. And Dakota gave Gunner Skinta, who ultimately gave it to my husband, Dakota gave my husband his phone number and said, have your wife call me when she graduates. She's going to need to talk to somebody, more or less. And so I called him, and he actually answered. Like, he answered an unknown number, which I thought was crazy. And the first thing he did was he introduced me to his speaking agent, which was really neat. But then he said something to me, and this was back in 2015, maybe early 2016, that was life-changing. And he said to me, everybody who hears your story, half of them will love you for it, and half of them will hate you for it, no matter what. So just get right with that. Just understand, half will hate you and half will love you. And he said, there's nothing you're going to do to change it, so be true to thyself. And he's like, there's people out there that don't know your story, and when they hear it, the way they hear it, it'll affect how they think about it, but half of them will hate it. And then, so what I associate that to is if you ever go to a sporting event, whenever a team scores 99 out of 100 times, half the people at the game are happy about it and half the people are mad about it. And you don't want people to stop scoring, so just keep shooting the ball, just keep kicking the goal, just keep throwing that pass, whatever it is, because people are just going to hate you. And it really, really helped, because I realized that it wasn't me. It was just the situation. And out of the haters, they're usually a little bit louder. And the post you're referring to this happened in late 2015, early 2016. This past Saturday, a couple days ago, I got to shake Dakota's hand for the first time, and I got to tell him this story. And he didn't remember what he had said to me, but it was fantastic to be able to tell this person, hey, you improved my perspective on all aspects of my life because you took 5 minutes to talk to a complete stranger and say, it's okay that people aren't going to like you.
Was that, I mean, I assume that was well received. That's awesome. That's really cool that he did that. And I commented back, I mean, let's not sugarcoat it. There was a lot of vitriol when you've graduated, just people spewing some nasty things. And it was upsetting to see, but I'm sure, it was difficult for you to hear a lot of that, but I'm so motivated to see that you weren't blinded by that and you saw the positivity that came out of it and the impact that you've made. So it was kind of sad to see a lot of the people that were upset with it. But you've held your head high, and I applaud you for that. So you one more time, you graduated Ranger School in 2015,
Yes, sir.
and you were still in this industry during that time. What was the transition like when you're done with Ranger School? I assume you had some sort of a break after, and then you go back to the working world in engineering. How was that? Did you see it differently, or was anything different in the industry for you?
Well, I will say one of the most uh, shocking differences is I didn't take any extra time because I didn't have any vacation days and I used up all my military leave.
You are
So I graduated
insane. Oh my
yeah.
goodness, good for you. So you come back the size of a toothpick after Ranger School. Oh
With a
geez.
shaved head,
Yeah.
and I have scars on my scalp. So where I've had stitches. So I looked bad. It was bad enough. It's another story, but probably shouldn't tell it. I'll tell you that one later.
All right.
But I looked bad going to work, and so I go from pomp and circumstance to my husband and kids came down, and we drove back to Texas from Georgia, and I go back to work either Monday or Tuesday after that with my bald head, trying to wear a skirt and these really big earrings to try to just fem up my look. And I'm in the elevator going up to my office and nobody knows what I just went through. Like nobody cares. I mean, it's a huge corporation, so nobody cares. And I'm going up the elevator and all of a sudden, like on floor 3, some young female gets in and she's like, "Oh my God, you're her, you're her, you're her. I need to get your autograph. Oh my God." And then on floor 5, the door opens up again and she just leaves. And the other 5 people in the elevator are like, "What was that?" And how can I tell them what I had gone through over the last X number of weeks? So I just said, I don't know what was wrong with her. And I just rode the elevator the rest of the way up and went to my old desk and started work. And so it was a very interesting way to start back at Shell because I realized that other than a handful of people, I didn't change the world for anyone, and definitely nobody in the oil and gas industry. So I need to get my nose back down to the grindstone and like everything I've learned in the military, what have you done for me lately? So I had to get refocused and recharged on being a project manager and not be Ranger Jaster anymore. But the things that did carry over was the fact that I really got to understand the younger generation. If you live with and have bunk beds with 20-somethings and you're in your 30s, late 30s, you have to start to understand the cultural differences. What's the difference between Gen X's and millennials? So I really started to understand the younger generation, which helped me quite a bit because obviously a lot of the younger workforce in the construction industry are millennials, especially now. So I was able to bring those lessons learned on how to communicate with a younger generation back to Shell, and I think that was my biggest takeaway, at least immediately.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. It's hard to describe to them, especially somebody that might not have had anyone in their family that was from the service, what Ranger School is, what you went through. And I can imagine that was a pretty humbling time of your life. You're coming back, like you said, from the pomp and circumstance. But, man, if you were working with my company, I'd say, look, Lisa needs to get a drug test because she's on something and she's ragged. I mean, something's going on. No, that's crazy. So that's interesting to hear that transition. And like you said, you were the first reservist to get tabbed. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's just wild. People aren't used to that. So what a cool story. So, Lisa, I've really enjoyed my time talking to you. It's always great to connect with you. So if somebody wants to reach out and get a hold of you, how do they do that?
Without a doubt, as much as people hate social media, I love it. I absolutely love it. I even love the haters. I do. So please reach out via social media. That is the best way to do it. And I will respond to you as long as you're not a weird stalker writing me in Arabic and asking me for money. But The other way is I have my own website. It's deletetheadjective.com. And all the ways you can connect with me are available there. Again, deletetheadjective.com. But no matter what, if one of my favorite parts of the military, or one of the things I hold the dearest to my heart, nearest and dearest, is the fact that the military believes in teach, coach, and mentor. And that has held over into what I do as a full-time job and what I did as a project manager for all the years that I did that. Teach, coach, mentor is a fundamental part of who I am. So please, if you have questions, please, 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 please do reach out via social media or through my website, deletetheadjective.com.
Yep, and I'll vouch for you. You answered my message, and we began this friendly relationship, and I appreciate it. Lisa, it's good talking with you anytime. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Scott.
All right. If you're a military veteran in the construction industry, or you're in the construction industry and support our military vets, and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, you can find me at constructionvetpodcast@gmail.com, or send me a message on LinkedIn. You can find me there at Scott Friend. Let's share the stories and motivate others.